Aaron here again from Aaron's Weathering. Today I thought we would do a little project with the steel coil containers, colloquially known as the Butterboxes, but their code being either RV or RH containers. So we're referring to these specimens produced by Auscision models. They come in a twin pack, and today we're going to see about weathering them, and we have a few photos here for comparison. So here's the actual prototype, as you can see, this one being a bit sun bleached and weathered. We also have this photo here of varying degrees of weathering and dirt grime build up on the containers, and this one here as well, bit of an extreme from weathered, dirty to a fairly recently later manufactured Butterbox. So we'll just duck back to the other photo here. So today we'll do two versions. We're going to do a mildly weathered one and a heavily weathered one. So first off, we're going to look at a few things like the rust around here where the container locks are and latches. Not so much rust around the body itself. A little bit around here where they've put the tines in to lift the box itself off. And you got a little bit around the container locks up here. But apart from that, it's just a grimy container. It's seen a bit of traffic. What will be more obvious in the other photos is you've got a bit of wheel grime splash up happening on the ends of here when they've been running on open deck containers, and we'll move on to that. So here you can see we've got various stages of weathering condition. This one's quite dirty, but you can notice that it has got like wind buff or wind abrasion, that the ribbed areas or the waffle areas don't have as much dirt and grime to it as opposed to the valley of the waffle. You can see a little bit more wheel grime coming up the end there, more rust around the platform itself, and you can see on top as well that there's dirt build up around the surfaces, and again the ribs on the roof, they're fairly clean from being wind blown. In this last photo that we looked at, you can see quite clearly here how they've got a bit of wheel grime coming up the end of the containers, as well as the rust around the blocks. So we're going to look at doing that with our first container, and we're going to do a mild weathering version of it. So here is our subject. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an all-over powder covering of it, and I'm going to introduce you to a form of what they call subtractive weathering. So we're going to cover it all up with dirt and grime, but then we're going to remove a lot of that, and I'll show you how you can do that with just an ordinary pencil eraser. So let's get right into it. So we want to sun bleach the container again with a bit of white powder. So we'll just start doing vertical strokes with it. We'll touch around all the sides with that, and then we will move on to doing the subtractive weathering. We'll do the ends. And we'll continue to do that all around. Okay, so now I've covered the whole Butterbox with a bit of the dust, bit of brown, give it a bit of slight surface rust definition on the top of the box, and we've certainly gone around all the surfaces and covered up. So now we're going to introduce the subtractive weathering. So I've just got an ordinary pencil eraser here. And we're just going to go over the surface like so, and we're going to subtract what's on the raised edges. So that's also going to help give a soft transition on the actual hip of the waffle here, so it doesn't have a sharp defined separation or contrast between the two surfaces. So we'll go around. Now this is just an ordinary pencil eraser, there's nothing special about it. Across the top. So you can see that colours have stayed in the recess areas, and we're bringing the colours back to the top. Now with a clean brush, I shall just give that a little wipe, get the rubber debris off. Okay. Now, from there, let's have a look at the end with the wheel grind marks. So that, as we've seen in the photos here, that does build up all over the surface there, not just in the valley of the hip. So we'll get a little bit of dark brown, bit of charcoal, and with a fine tip brush, we're going to start running it ever so gently on there. Bit of brown. And just feather it out a little bit. A little bit in this area here. Actually, what we'll do, we'll actually take a little step back there. I'm going to take a little bit of the powder out in this area here. So I use the sharp end, pointing end of the rubber. Just get in there, clean it up, give it a bit of cleanliness again. And then back with the brush, we'll start introducing a little bit of that grime back in there. Okay, and we'll continue to do that, and we'll proceed around the other side. Give it a little bit more grind because it's on the end of the wagon, not so much wind. And we'll leave it at that. Okay, now moving back on to the side of the containers here, we want to dial back the white and grime of the powders here. So again, get the rubber on its end, clean it out. Now, if you want, cut the rubber up, make it into a sharper point, get it in there if you want. Or alternatively, we have these special rubber tipped, what they're called a color shaper. So they help move acrylics and pastels and stuff for artists, but they also work great getting into the little nooks and crannies of the container area. And clean that up. Now going back to our photo, it's much more of a browny, dirty colour around this area, and it's still got a little bit of rust marks around the tine pockets here, so we'll look at starting onto them. And also let's have a look at the rust on the container locks here on the platform that the coils sit on. So first of all, with the small tip, let's just introduce a little bit of brown, just a little bit into the area here. Just to take away that final brown look. You're always going to get dirt sitting on the flat surfaces, so let's make sure we get that. Okay, now we're going to move on to the rusting of the container locks and blocks around the base here. Again, let's go back to our photo. We can see that there is quite a lot of rust build up around the base here, a little bit touched around the time pockets up here. Not so much on these top blocks, even though they're designed to be stacked on each other. There doesn't appear to be a lot of activity on top of those, but mainly focused around the bottom. So we'll just do a little bit of dulling up around the tops there, a little bit of rust around the pockets and around the bottom there. So basically you've got three colours to work with when it comes to rusting at a basic level. You have a dark brown, which in this case is burnt umber, then a medium brown, which is burnt sienna, then finished off with a orange or a terracotta finish. So this represents a very dark, very fixated rust. It's been there for a long time and the oxidation has really taken a hold. And this one here, it's been there for a while. It's still fresh, and then you've got the orange, which really you notice after rains and just oxidization, fresh oxidization, rusting in the weather. So best way to do it, I find, is you want to layer up the colors as you go. So start with the dark brown, and we're just going to gently rub it around here. I've dipped the pencil into some acrylic thinner, which helps softens up the tip of these acrylic pencils. We just gently rub it around. Maybe just some little spots where I've gone in, a little bit of time damage, and across the top here. Speed it up, I'll introduce a little bit of air just to help speed up the drying. Okay, now for our next colour. So we don't want to rub it around as much as what we tried to with the darker brown. We just introduce it to the surfaces. It's like a wiping action. All right, and then the light rust. So, recent activity, it's been scratched in movement while being loaded or unloaded. Again, we'll just touch those surfaces. bit in the holes, because that's where a lot of activity happens. And it's all about just blending the colours. All right. Okay, so let's just touch off the last bit on this side. A little bit of orange. Around the pockets. All right. I think that's pretty good. We'll fix up that little hole that we accidentally filled when the tip broke off. But apart from that, I think it's looking pretty good and ready for revenue service. So we'll move on to the next one, which is going to be a fairly heavily weathered Butterbox. So now we're going to look at weathering a Butterbox a little bit more extreme. We're going to start by roughing up or removing the paint here around it with a fiberglass brush. So we just want to wear the top of the black line just in a small manner, as if it, just a slight abrasion from a few years of traffic. So what you do is just gently rub just over the black area, and we just want to start to see the blue underneath the black coming through. And with a clean rag, just wipe off that excess. So you can see here that we've got some blue just poking through the black. And you can do that all along. You don't want it too extreme, but just lift some of that colour off. And a little bit on the BHP logo, just a light touch. Now, if you're curious where you can get a fiberglass brush, most reputable hobby shops carry them. So yeah, worn away the bit of the top of the print of the Pacific National and the blue scope. Let me just give the okay, yeah. Look, let's just leave it at that. I think that's pretty good. Now, what we'll do, now that that's all done, we'll seal that with a bit of matte finish. Okay, so we're going to move into this part now where we're going to be applying the powders. Look, we're going to use a little bit of modeller's license. Look, as usual, as my own philosophy is, there's no hard and fast set rules about how something should look. It's always the eye of the beholder. So with this example, we've got very rusty, surface rust coloured grime and muck, sides, top, but notice that the pockets on the top, they're fairly clean. And the base as well, that's pretty clean, but not to say that this base isn't the original base that came with that container. They're always swapping and changing. So we'll go ahead and start dusting this up. So we're going to mix a bit of the light and dark browns, a little bit of white. Now we want to build up on it because we don't want to lose too much of the signage, even though we've rubbed it back with the fiberglass pen. So here we go. We can still see that the black line's been worn. Introduce a bit more of the dark brown. Going to introduce a little bit more of the rust colour and get that rusty look to the oxidisation coming through. Make sure you really get that in there. The stipple of the brush pushes it in. Okay, so now we've got it built up. We're going to do our subtractive weathering with our eraser, and we're going to bring it back. And straight away, you can make all that difference. Now, one thing I didn't mention before with the subtractive weathering, if the rubber eraser gets too dirty, you can clean it with a little bit of enamel paint thinner. Just apply a little bit, just a small amount on a bit of rag. And just wipe the eraser clean. Make sure it's dry when you reapply because you don't want to be removing any surface inadvertently from the solvent of the So we'll keep on going with that, and I'll finish it off around the ends, the other side, and we'll go over the top as well. So now I'm just adding the final touches to the top of the box. Again, a bit of the brown, a bit of the rusty colours. Blend them all together. Get all those surfaces covered. Now, unfortunately, these containers are very susceptible to graffiti from vandals. There are graffiti decals out there by different suppliers and manufacturers. It's just a personal choice. I'm not a big fan of graffiti, but it is a part of today's society, unfortunately. But I mean, by all means, if you want to go ahead and put a graffiti decal over it and then put the weathering powder on top of that, that'd serve you quite well. All right, so we're going to do the last bit of the subtractive weathering. So off the top. That's going to look probably a little bit too much contrast on the top ribs here. So we will introduce a little bit more powder back on top of that, but only a very thin amount. Again, we just wipe off the rubber debris. And basically I've just wiped this brush off on the side of my little cloth. I'm just going to just run over it, picking up the edges. And just that subtle finish to it. Now, what also you can do is that sometimes water will pool up in any divots or hollows in the steel, so you could, with your fine tip brush, add a little bit of rust in the center, make it like a rust spot. And from there, just gently feather it out. So what I've done there is I've built up on top of it layer by layer, and to give that, so like from initial rust until it spreads out. So that all I did was, let's do it on the other end. Started out with the bright rust, which is up in my corner here on my sandbox. Just a little bit on the tip. We're going to introduce like a swirl. Then followed by the brown. And then finally, I've used, this is a little bit of black here actually, so I'm going for a really dark colour. I'm just going to focus that on the centre. So you got like the rust patches started in the centre and then it's spreading out. And then we just give it a gentle brush just to blend it in. So you've got a couple of rust spots on top of the Butterbox. Okay, so while we're still on the subject of rust, let's take our pencils to the blocks and we'll start rusting those up. And this time, so we're going to use a little bit of modeler's license, but we're going to do a little bit on the tops here. So in the holes, touch in there and in there. And you could put a little bit of a rust streaks down the sides. Again, it's all about layering up the colours. It's all about an illusion for your eye. Okay, now I've pretty much finished up what I'm happy with. I have gone ahead and done a few little things like putting powder inside the time pockets so you don't get a contrast of clean blue inside the holes here and around here. Also in the time pockets down there, I've put a little bit of rust around the lock blocks. A little bit of a rust streak on the side there. I've also added the wheel grind marks now on the ends. So I think we have a very grotty Butterbox that started out life much cleaner. So when you compare the two, you certainly have a contrast in the colours and in the level of grime and build-up. Okay, well, that's all for today's weathering tutorial on weathering the RVRH containers, Butterboxes as we like to call them, and stay tuned for my next weathering session.